go. Hi, it's Nick Davies, and today I'm glad to be joined by Charmaine Johns, who's a hypnotherapist and recently trained blast practitioner who specialises in trauma and PTSD. Charmaine is still recovering from the coronavirus and also lives in Piedmont, which is next to Lombardy, which is the kind of epicenter of coronavirus in Italy. So thank you for joining me today, Charmaine.
Thank you.
I know you're not feeling 100%, so thank you for your time. So just first of all, I'd just like to ask you is, how's your experience of having coronavirus?
It's obviously it's very different for everybody's experiencing it very differently. But I first started feeling unwell about 3 weeks ago. And I'm staying in a place that has quite a high footfall of tourists and people coming and going, especially from areas like Milan, which is Lombardy.
Yeah.
And I was, initially I had a bit of an upset tummy for a couple of days. And I did think to myself, it wasn't one of the symptoms, and coronavirus wasn't really at the forefront of the news then. And I had a bit of an upset tummy, and then I got some aches, and I felt a bit fluey. And I spent a day in bed. I had a temperature and I had a fever, and then that went away. And then the symptoms just kept cycling, to be honest. I just kept getting a fever every couple of days, and my temperature would go up. I was incredibly tired. I just slept and slept and slept. I developed a cough. And then after about 6 days, I started sneezing, and my nose was running, and I lost my voice. And that happened for about 3 or 4 days. And in that window, I completely lost my sense of taste and smell. And I don't mean, it was diminished. It was absolutely, I actually burnt a piece of toast, and I didn't realize it was burning until I saw the smoke coming out of the kitchen.
Wow.
It's a very strange feeling. There's just nothing. I can put a lemon in my mouth and taste nothing. And then I started getting a heaviness in my chest.
Yeah.
And so every time the symptoms would go in a cycle, and then I'd sort of feel a bit hot and achy, and then I'd get another set of symptoms. And then I got a cough, and I was struggling to, at night, I was sleeping on my back, and I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd literally be trying to just, take when you're trying to take a deep breath and catch your breath, and I just couldn't catch my breath. So you then start getting anxiety, which makes it worse. You're panicking because you realize that a lot of people are going into hospital, and not very many of them are coming out. You keep getting told on the news that, the symptoms are mild, and it's a couple of aches and pains, and everyone will be fine. And, it only affects the old, and it only affects people who've got underlying health conditions. And you're just thinking, well, this is different. And
excuse me, Charmaine, how would you say it's different? That's quite important for us watching here. What would you say is the major differences, or the minor?
I think the major differences is with flu. I've had flu before, like proper influenza, and it kind of hits you like a freight train.
Yeah.
Whereas this is it's almost gradual. So I can totally understand how some people can kind of just shake it off and just think, it's just it's just something. It's not, but I didn't get all my symptoms all at the same time. They came in stages.
Yeah.
And I'd had a slight, this is one of the questions that everyone is already asking themselves is, maybe they've had it for longer than they realized. Some people have been ill since January. There've been quite a few people who've been poorly. And I think for a lot of people, just the subtlety of it, it's very, very all-encompassing, but very subtle.
What would you say is the hardest thing with, and are you through the worst of it now? What stage are you in?
I sincerely hope I am. I sincerely hope so. I've still got a lot of heaviness in my chest, and I think the one thing that's been constant throughout has been the fatigue.
Yeah.
It just absolutely wipes you out. I mean, I've been sleeping for 12, 14 hours a day.
Wow.
And that in itself isn't great, because you think, well, I need to get up and I need to get out and I need to move. But I think it's it's very deceptive, I think. I think it's very clever, obviously, in how it jumps from person to person. But I think the danger is from when you're contagious to when you show symptoms.
And you've had this since, I think you said, was it the third
the first week of March, I'd say, probably around when I started noticing it was probably the 5th or 6th. Was when I start, you know, and it was only when I was piecing, you know, sort of thinking to myself, hang on a second, that this, you know, is this more? Because I'm one of these people who just soldiers on.
Yeah.
So I realized something was wrong. And then when I got the upset tummy, of course, that wasn't a symptom.
Yeah.
And it was only when I started reading the Johns Hopkins and the World Health Organization websites, and they were starting to correlate things. And I think as well, from what I've seen in the press, you know, even the NHS and some of the, you know, some countries have got it wrong because they've sort of said, oh, but it's just a temperature and a dry cough. I didn't get the cough until, you know, well into the thick of it.
Wow. So one of the things that you said to me today, I hope you don't mind me sharing, was that I was one of the first few people you'd seen face to face, which was interesting. So let me ask you, how is it in Italy, and how is your experience being isolated and confined? How's that been emotionally for you, and what's the situation in Italy?
Well, I'm not in a city. So, you know, I think there are pros and cons. Being in a city, obviously, there's a higher density of the population, so it transmits more. Cities are probably easier to control in terms of making sure nobody goes out. I'm in a town that is just over 2,000 meters. I'm, you know, halfway up a mountain, and it's certainly very isolating because this is a tourist area.
Yeah.
And I think the downside of that is you do have a lot of new people every week. You have an influx of, you know, thousands of new people coming in, and they come in on holiday. The town has, you know, times where it is quite empty anyway, you know, because it's not, you know, full of people all the time. And normally at the end of a season, you experience a rapid sort of drop in population. So you're kind of waiting for that to happen. I think one of the things that I found that was quite a big shock to my system was that happened 5 or 6 weeks early. So in my head, I was kind of going, I know, you know, come end of April, you know, everything kind of tails off and it you know, gets really quiet. And then all of a sudden it was, you know, bang.
Yeah.
And then we had a very weird, you know, and I think this has happened in the UK as well. A lot of people then decided, well, the cities are dangerous, so we're going to go to our second home.
Yeah.
So people were just arriving. You know, there were people who hadn't been here for a while. There were apartments that I was seeing that had lights on in the evening that I'd never seen with lights on before. So I think Italy's had a fair share of that sort of mentality of, oh, it's nothing, we'll just, you know, soldier on, or, you know, let's go and have a holiday in the mountains. And the country, you know, obviously the UK has had something similar, but in Italy, they almost had to close things in stages. So when they closed the schools, all the school kids started booking holidays to come skiing because they thought, fantastic, we'll just go to the mountains and ski. Right. Yeah. So very quickly they had to close all the ski slopes. So that's why all the ski slopes in Italy were shut down. Wow. You know, they had to enforce, people were still going skiing. And I read a story of one couple who were caught skiing and tested and found that they were actually infected with corona. And there are laws here where you would go from a fine to 3 months in prison to now I think it's something between 1 to 12 years in prison if you are found to be breaking the law, going outside of your area, being infected, possibly affecting people, they die, you know. So there's a lot of social ramifications. And I think, you know, Spain and Italy have been very hard hit because culturally it's, you know, hi, hug, kiss, you know, let's sit and have lunch with 30 people. Let's talk. And it's, you know, it's not a naturally isolated, you know, isolation. It doesn't come naturally to Italians, doesn't come naturally to the Spanish. So I think culturally it's been quite hard. And then you've got the diehards. Italy as well has a culture of not always respecting authority. Sometimes sees the government as perhaps being a bit heavy-handed. So you tell us to do something, we're not going to do it. So I think they've struggled with that as well. But they've done the best they could. Being the first country really in outside of China to have had such an epidemic on their hands. They've done the best they can, and hats off to them for taking some very, very difficult decisions early on, closing borders, closing schools. Even in the UK, not all the schools are 100% shut. So it's been hard, and culturally, as I said, it's not normal for Italians. Being a foreigner in Italy again is different, because I'm here on my own. And that's my choice, and it's ordinarily it's a great experience, but all of a sudden you are pretty much incarcerated there, and you're then having to deal with guidance and advice that's not in your mother tongue. And there's one thing talking a foreign language conversationally, but when it gets kind of like to the hardcore stuff, it's you're being government bulletins, and it's like a whole other it's a whole other level. So I've been frankly I've been terrified at times. The nearest hospital is 65-70 kilometers away. Italy is not, you can't get into a hospital unless you are significantly respiratory, you've got compromised breathing. And then you think to yourself, well, do I actually want to go into hospital? There's that thing of, what not very many people seem to be coming out of hospital. So there've been some long dark nights of the soul. I try and look at the positive, and I think, well, the flip side is, how would I feel if I was in a small apartment with other people that I couldn't get away from? And I think on balance, if I had a choice, I'd much rather be on my own, because I think there are probably some people who are struggling. I have 2 cats and 2 birds with me. You've probably heard them in the background, but they have kept me relatively sane, because it's some sentient beings, which it's just nice to be able to see something else that's breathing. But it does feel like the apocalypse. You stand outside on the balcony and it's just nothing. There's just nothing, and you don't know what's going on. You can't see a doctor because the doctors don't want to see you. You have a number you can ring, but you're talking to somebody who's overworked, and English isn't their first language. And then I also had the dilemma of not actually being able to get back to the UK, because I didn't fly here, I drove. So the borders are closed. France, I'm 7 or 8 miles from the French border here. But the French are not letting anybody through. So you have to be careful that you don't make a decision like, oh, quick panic, pack, go, because you could quite easily end up, being stranded between countries, and then you really are stuck. And you can't get. At the moment, I'm just thinking to myself, if I go back to the UK, am I just going to go back into Groundhog Day, where I've got to go through this whole process again? Of quarantine from scratch. It's exhausting. Doing nothing and not being able to do anything is we take our liberty for granted. So mentally, it's very difficult.
The next question: have you got any advice, for us in the UK? From obviously having the coronavirus, being in Italy, and from your therapeutic background, is there any advice you could share with us?
Gosh. I think for everybody, there's theoretical situations and there's reality. And I think we all like to think that we behave well in a crisis. We're all kind and we're all generous. That's not the case. When somebody really is faced with something that is potentially a contagious disease, they see you and they run in the opposite direction. They don't want to. This is like how HIV and AIDS was in the beginning, where everybody were, they were social pariahs, and it took a lot of years and a lot of education before people realized that it wasn't that, touch somebody and you become infected. With this, it's invisible, and there's a lot of scaremongering, there's a lot of hype. It's different things to different people. So in terms of advice, you know, everyone is going to have a different experience. Everybody is going to have a different journey. And unfortunately for the majority of us, I don't think we know, this is unprecedented.
Yeah.
So I don't think we know how we're going to behave in this situation until the situation happens. That said, I think the reactions, you know, when I was communicating with people before this blew up, I was being told by people to calm down. I was being told by people, oh, you know, it's flu. Everybody gets flu. What are you doing? Don't be so dramatic.
And what's your answer to that? Because that's being bandied about a lot.
Again, this virus is affecting different people in different ways. You know, before it was old people with underlying health conditions. Now, you know, there are people in their 20s dying.
Wow.
It just depends. You know, what I realized very early on is that there are only two things that are going to get you through this. Physically, this is from my personal experience. Physically, it's your immune system. So, you know, your immune system is something that we need to respect and take care of, and it's unfortunately not something you can fix overnight. So if, you know, you burn the candle at both ends and you're prone to illness, etc., then, you know, or you smoke or you vape, then, you know, potentially you could end up in some difficulty. I think the other side of it is we're going to be tested as to really how, you know, how are we as strong as we think we are? You know, do we have grace under pressure, grace under fire? You know, it's a very different story when you feel, you know, survival is a base instinct in us. You know, we want to survive, and if somebody is threatening that survival in real terms, you know, people become someone different. So, you know, there's a lot of, I was very deeply affected by Caroline Flack's suicide in February, and I was still kind of processing that whole story when this kicked off. So I was already sort of in that headspace of, you know, mortality, and just thinking, you know, what are we turning into as a culture, that we can become so brutal and so cruel from the anonymity of our keyboards. You know, we can just say anything. And I think now we're being re-educated, hopefully, in how to use media and technology differently, because the world is overtaken by, you know, people. Joe Wicks is doing exercise classes, and Carol Vorderman doing maths class. You know, everybody is sharing and becoming so. We've got such a valuable opportunity to use this in a positive way. And you know, I think from a mental health perspective, yes, it's good to have someone to talk to. But it's also risky that you go into a very dark place and you kind of just become a little bit, you know, neurotic. I'm speaking from my personal experience.
No, I totally agree. I think, you know, working from home myself and seeing clients, what a lot of people don't realise is how home working, how much stress and isolation and low mood it creates. And it's one thing, and you know, from talking to you today and doing all the other Skype stuff that I do, is I think we need to set up Skype well, not just Skype, Zoom, or we were Zooming today, but online communities where we can communicate like this, and maybe, you know, certainly for the short term, maybe our new cafe bars are going to be like this, where we pour a coffee and we chat, you know.
Absolutely. And I would welcome opportunities. You know, I think I've not wanted to impose on people. You know, I always tend to think, you know, let me just figure out what I want to say. And, you know, I agree. I think if we can create a middle ground of not necessarily connecting with people because we're in crisis and we have to, you know, offload that and talk it through, and then, because then obviously you've got to process all of that, and so I just welcome, what I've missed is intellectual discussion.
Yeah.
Like a book club.
Yeah.
Something as simple as, well, let's just have a news-free zone, and let's just talk about, what's new out there, what's trending, what, how are we finding, social media in terms of a communication tool and a business tool, etc.
Yeah.
So let's use it as an opportunity to evolve, and I think technology is being tested in a way that it's never been never been used before. It's been literally used as a lifeline, as opposed to kids constantly on their phones playing games, WhatsApping and Facebook and this kind of thing. So I definitely think there'll be two sides. There are going to be the people who basically just blatantly ignore whatever they can and exploit things potentially. And there are people who are going to definitely evolve and come out of this experience with having a walk the walk and talk the talk, because we're all in this. This isn't just a few isolated people. We genuinely are in this together.
Charmaine, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure all the watchers and listeners really appreciate your time. So thank you from me, and please, do make a speedy recovery. But thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.